But as she scrubbed the hard cold floor, she could hear Karen and Clara laughing, but it wasn't their laughter that scared her. It was the quietness that came after their laughter. That means Mrs. Johnson was watching her closely, waiting for her to make a mistake. Amara knew what would happen if she did. The sharp pain of the cane, the insulting words, but even worse was the fear that this terrible life might never end. Once upon a time, there lived a young girl named Amara. She was born into a humble but happy family. Her parents were hard-working farmers in a small village far from the city. Though they didn't have much, they had enough to live comfortably. Amara's mother always told her that education was the key to a brighter future, and her father encouraged her to dream big. She loved going to school, where she excelled in her studies. However, strategy struck when Amara was just 9 years old. One fateful evening, her parents went to a nearby town to sell their produce, but on their way back, they were involved in a fatal car accident. In a matter of moments, Amara lost both of her parents. The news devastated her. She cried for days, wondering how she could survive without the people she loved most in the world. Her parents had been her everything, left with no immediate family to care for her. Amara's life took a drastic turn. She was sent to live with an aunt in a remote village, a woman who was kind but very poor. The aunt already had many children of her own and struggled to provide for them, let alone an additional mouth to feed. After a few months, it became clear that she could not continue to care for Amara, so she tried to send her to Lagos to live with a wealthy family that was known to take in young girls as maids. The family promised that they would care for her and send her to school and give her a better life. With a heavy heart, Amara left her aunt's house and traveled to Lagos, a city bustling with life, cars and skyscrapers, very different from the quiet village she had always known. She arrived at the mansion of the Johnson family, a family known for the wealth and high social status. The house was massive, with tall gates and well-kept gardens. To young Amara, it seemed like a new world filled with possibilities. Mrs. Johnson, the lady of the house, welcomed her with a cold, hard smile. She was tall, imposing woman, always dressed in the finest clothes. Her two daughters, Karen and Clara, were both in their late teens. They looked at Amara with disdain, barely acknowledging her presence. Despite the cold reception, Amara held on to her hope that her life would improve. Mrs. Johnson promised to send her to school and give her a bright future, but these promises quickly faded away. From the moment Amara arrived, it became clear that she was not seen as part of the family, but rather as a servant. Every morning, while Karen and Clara slept in their comfortable beds, Amara was up before dawn, scrubbing the floors, washing dishes and preparing breakfast. Her workload grew by the day, and soon she was the one doing all the housework. Karen and Clara treated her like a personal slave. They would demand that Amara wash their clothes, clean their rooms, and run their errands. They never said thank you and constantly found reasons to complain about her work. If a stain was not fully removed from a dress or if the food was too salty, Mrs. Johnson would beat her mercilessly. She would flog Amara with a cane, slap her face, or pull her by the ear. "What kind of a child are you? Were you sent to torment me?" Mrs. Johnson would yell at her, accusing Amara of being a burden, a useless child who could do nothing right. Karen and Clara often joined in, laughing as they watched Amara cry. They too would hit her whenever they felt like, making Amara's life a living nightmare. On many nights, Amara would go to bed with an empty stomach. Mrs. Johnson would often withhold food as a punishment for minor mistakes. leaving Amara to lie awake, her stomach growling in hunger. She slept on the floor in a small windowless storeroom at the back of the house. The room was dark, cold and damp, with rats running about in the corners. Amara often cried herself to sleep, wondering if she would ever escape the hell she was living in. Despite all of this, Amara did not lose hope. Deep down, she held on to the memory of her parents and the value they had taught her. She remembered her mom's words, "Amara, always work hard and never give up. No matter how difficult life gets, there's always a way out." Those words became her guiding light. Whenever Amara found a moment to herself, she would quietly pick up old newspaper and books that the Johnson family no longer wanted. She taught herself to read and write, knowing that education was the key to escaping her mystery. She also observed everything around her, learning about cooking, cleaning and running a household with precision. Even though Mrs. Johnson treated her poorly, Amara became incredibly skilled at managing the home. Years passed, and Amara grew into a young woman. Her body bore the scars of years of abuse, but her spirit remained unbroken. She had learned to endure pain and hardship without complaint. Becoming strong and resilient, she worked harder than ever, silently mastering every task given to her. People who visited the Johnson house often praised her for her diligence, but Mrs. Johnson never gave her any credit. Instead, she took all the compliment for herself, pretending that her household ran smoothly because of her own effort. One day, a wealthy businesswoman named Mr. Victor came to visit the Johnson family. He was an old friend of Mr. Johnson who passed away years earlier. Mr. Victor was a kind and observant man. During his visit, he noticed how hard Amara worked. He watched as she cleaned, cooked and attended to every task with a quiet grace that stood in a stark contrast to the laziness of Karen and Clara. The two daughters, now in their 20s, did nothing but lazy around, spending their days gossiping, shopping and scrolling through their phones. They had grown all spoiled and entitled, expecting everything to be handed to them without lifting a finger. Mr. Victor saw potential in Amara. On one of his visits, he approached her and asked, "How are you, my dear? Do you go to school?" Amara shook her head, too shy to speak at first. She looked down at her worn-out slippers, unsure if she should say more, but Mr. Victor's gentle voice encouraged her to continue. "No, sir," she said finally. "I was supposed to, but..." She trailed off, knowing that Mrs. Johnson would punish her if she revealed too much. Mr. Victor understood. He had heard stories about how some wealthy families in Lagos treated their maid, and he could see that Amara was no exemption. He decided to help her. A few weeks later, he returned to the Johnson household with an offer. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, "I've noticed that Amara is a hard-working girl. I'm looking for someone like her to help with cleaning at my company. Would you allow her to work for me?" Mrs. Johnson was eager to rid herself of Amara's presence, and thinking she could easily replace her with another maid, agreed without hesitation. She believed that Amara would remain a lowly cleaner for the rest of her life, and she didn't care what happened to her. When Amara started working for Mr. Victor's company, she felt a new sense of freedom. Though she was still a cleaner, she no longer had to endure the cruel beating and insults she had faced in the Johnson household. She poured all her energy into her work, cleaning the office spaces with care and diligence. She was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, never slacking in her duties. Impressed by her work ethic, Mr. Victor decided to give Amara more responsibilities. He promoted her from a cleaner to a secretary, teaching her how to handle office tasks like filing documents, answering phones and managing schedules. Amara, who had been secretly educating herself all those years, quickly adapted to the new role. She worked hard to improve her skills, and with Mr. Victor's guidance, she became one of the most reliable employees in the company. Amara's life continued to change for the better. With the money she earned, she enrolled in evening classes to complete her education. It wasn't easy balancing work and school, but Amara was determined to succeed. Her teachers were amazed at her dedication, and she graduated with a top marks. After graduation, she continued to work for Mr. Victor, who saw her potential as a future business leader. With his support, Amma decided to start her own business. Using the knowledge she had gained over the years, she opened a small boutique selling high-quality fabrics and clothing. She worked tirelessly to build her brand, and soon her business became one of the most successful in Lagos. People admired her for her honesty, hard work and perseverance. Meanwhile, life was not so kind to Karen and Clara. They had grown up expecting everything to be handed to them, and when they eventually married, their husband quickly grew tired of their rude and entitled behavior. Karen and Clara refused to do any housework, treated their in-laws with disrespect, and constantly demanded more than they were given. Their husbands were frustrated with their attitude, soon grew weary of them. Karen and Clara's inability to manage their homes, combined with their rude and arrogant behavior, caused constant conflict in their marriages. They were used to having everything done for them, and they never lifted a finger to make their husband's life easier. When things didn't go their way, they would throw tantrums or sulk for days, expecting their husband to pamper them as their mother had always done. Clara's husband, who had initially been captivated by her beauty, soon realized that her character was far from what he had hoped for. She would spend the family's money frivolously, neglect her duties at home, and constantly complain about everything. After years of enduring her disrespectful attitude, he could no longer take it. One evening, after yet another argument, he packed her bags and sent her back to her mother's house, telling her that he could no longer remain married to someone who had no respect for anyone. Karen's situation was not much different. Her husband had tried to be patient with her, thinking that with time she would adjust to her role as a wife. But Karen, like her sister, refused to change. She mocked her husband's attempt to work hard. After belittling him in front of others, she expected to be waited on hand and foot, never offering any help or support in running the household. Eventually, her husband too had enough. He gave her an ultimatum: either change her ways or leave. When Karen refused to take him serious, she was also sent back to her mother's house in disgrace. Back at Mrs. Johnson's house, Karen and Clara were filled with bitterness. They had both been divorced, and now they had nothing to show for their years of entitlement and laziness. Their once beautiful faces were now hardened by anger and regret. They had no skills, no work ethic, and no ability to fend for themselves. They relied entirely on their mother, who was now old and frail, to take care of them. Mrs. Johnson, who was once a proud and worthy woman, was now a shadow of her former self. With her daughters back at home, both of them divorced and jobless, she was consumed by shame. She had spent years spoiling her daughters and neglecting to teach them the value of hard work. And now she was paying the price. Her family name, once respected, was now the subject of gossip in the neighborhood. Meanwhile, Amara's life continued to flourish. Her business had grown beyond her wildest dreams, and she had opened several branches across Lagos. Her reputation as a hard-working and kind businesswoman spread far and wide, attracting customers from all over the city. Despite her success, Amara remained humble. She never forgot the hardship she had endured and she used her wealth to help others who were in need. She started a foundation that provided scholarship to young girls from poor backgrounds, giving them the education she had once been denied. Amara's kindness and diligence did not go unnoticed. One day, while attending a business conference, she met a man named Odinaka. He was a successful entrepreneur, known for his intelligence and good heart. Odinaka admired Amara's resilience and hard work, and the two quickly formed a bond. Over time, their friendship blossomed into love. Odinaka appreciated Amara not just for her beauty, but for her character, her strength, and her compassion for others. After dating for a few years, Odinaka proposed to Amara in a simple but heartfelt ceremony. They married in a beautiful celebration, surrounded by family and friends. Their marriage was built on mutual respect, love, and a shared commitment to helping others. Together, they continue to grow their businesses and build a life filled with joy and fulfillment. One day, while Amara was visiting her old neighborhood, she ran into Mrs. Johnson. The once proud woman looked weak and defeated. She was sitting outside her house, her face etched with the lines of age and worry. When she saw Amara, her eyes widened in recognition. She remembered the young girl she had once maltreated, the girl she had denied an education and subjected to years of suffering. Now that same girl stood before her, successful, radiant, and at peace. "Amara," Mrs. Johnson said softly, her voice trembling with guilt. I don't know how to say this, but I'm sorry." Amara looked at the old woman, her heart filled with compassion. She had long ago forgiven Mrs. Johnson for the way she had been treated. The hardship she had endured had shaped her into the strong, capable woman she had become, and she harbored no resentment. "You don't need to say anything, ma," Amara replied, her voice gentle. "I've moved on, and I hold no grudges. Everything that happened helped me become who I am today." Mrs. Johnson lowered her head, tears welling in her eyes. She had lost everything: her wealth, her pride, and the respect of her community. Her daughters, once her greatest pride, were now burdens, and her past actions haunted her every day. As Amara walked away, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had risen above the pain and suffering, turning her challenges into strength. She had built a life filled with love, success, and purpose, all because she had refused to let bitterness take root in her heart. The lessons her parents had taught her about hard work, resilience, and kindness had carried her through every darkest of times. Karen and Clara, on the other hand, remained trapped in their own bitterness. They had been given every advantage growing up, yet they had squandered it all. Their laziness and sense of entitlement had left them with nothing but regret. They now lived with their mother, unable to find work, and their once carefree lives had turned into a circle of frustration and disappointment. The story of Amara and the Johnsons spread throughout the community. People spoke of Amara's rise from a poor, mistreated maid to a successful businesswoman with admiration and respect. They saw how hard work and perseverance had paid off for her, while laziness and arrogance had led to the downfall of Karen and Clara. Thank you for listening to this story. Please do well to subscribe to this channel for more interesting and educative stories. Turn on the notification bell so that you'll be notified when new videos are being dropped. And if this story you just finished listening to is interesting to you, or you have anything to say about the story, please drop it in the comment section. I'll be really grateful, and I will respond to you. See you in my next one. God bless you.